Early in the morning, Theodore Smith said calmly, "You're pregnant." Before I could react, he added, "The child is most likely mine. I plan to stay with the Smith family. Once you give birth, you'll have fulfilled your part of the marriage arrangement, and you can choose to leave or live your own life." I raised an eyebrow. Oh, so he wants to keep the child but not me. I sneered as I sat up in bed. "I'll raise the child myself. I can leave today." I threw a parting shot at him. "I must have been blind to fall for a scumbag like you." Theodore Smith was stunned. He stepped forward and grabbed my arm. "What did you just say?" "I didn't hear you clearly." I shook him off. "I said you're a scumbag." He grabbed me again. "The sentence before that." I shook him off once more. "I said I must have been blind." The story begins. Theodore Smith and I are in a secret marriage. The purpose is simple: to completely merge our family's interests so that we can cooperate without any distrust. In our circle, this is common practice. For the sake of benefits, children are bound by marriage, and once they have children, they go their separate ways. When the children grow up, they return to the family to work on the next generation's arranged marriages. When I married Theodore Smith, I had just broken up with my boyfriend a month prior. The heartbreak from my free romance was so intense that I numbly accepted my family's suggestion for an arranged marriage. On our wedding night, Theodore Smith and I consummated our marriage, and then he got up to leave. I thought he was going to sleep in a separate room, just like my parents did. But after a while, Theodore Smith returned with a hot towel and gently wiped the sweat from my forehead. "You must be tired. Would you like a hot cup of milk?" I raised my eyebrows in surprise, seeing his handsome face looking at me patiently and tenderly. I wasn't sure if it was my imagination, but there seemed to be a hint of warmth in his eyes. It felt like we were an ordinary couple, and I was stunned. Caught off guard, I shook my head in a daze, which made Theodore Smith chuckle. He patted my head. "It's late. Let's sleep." Saying this, he lay down beside me, holding me as he slept. This shocked me even more, and I kept thinking, does the Smith family want to take over my family, or are they interested in our other businesses? Why else would he act this way towards an arranged marriage partner? The next morning, I couldn't stand it anymore and confronted Theodore Smith. He responded with a sharp look. "We are husband and wife. Isn't it normal for a husband to take care of his wife?" I was at a loss for words. "Yes, an arranged marriage is still a marriage." I gave him an awkward smile. "Are you going to work now?" He fastened his last button and patted my head again. "We have a social event tonight. Prepare yourself." I nodded and, after Theodore Smith left for work, I sat alone in the empty villa, lost in thought. I used to work at an art gallery, managing my boyfriend's career as an emerging artist. After his artistic endeavors led him to sleep with my colleague, humiliating me, I quit my job in a fit of anger and returned home to an arranged marriage, becoming a full-time housewife, feeling utterly empty and aimless. It was worse than working. Finally, in the evening, I dressed up and attended an art exhibition with Theodore Smith, donating to the local arts fund. As we mingled with the crowd, I suddenly felt someone watching me. I turned towards the gaze and saw my ex-boyfriend, Benjamin Williams, standing not far away with a glass of wine, smiling at me. Beside him was the colleague he had cheated with. I turned away expressionlessly and focused on the paintings on the wall, realizing that this was Benjamin Williams' exhibition. Theodore Smith noticed something was wrong and whispered in my ear, "What's up?" I didn't know how to respond. I didn't want to bring up my disgraceful ex during our newlywed period. But before I could decide, my ex came over with long strides. He raised his glass to us. "Olivia, found a new boyfriend?" Nice choice. I didn't want to talk to him at all and just scoffed, pulling Theodore Smith to leave. But Theodore Smith didn't leave. Instead, he shook hands with my ex. "And you are?" "Her old flame," Benjamin Williams said nonchalantly, with the artist's carefree attitude towards relationships, completely disregarding Theodore Smith's feelings. Things like responsibility, boundaries, and respect meant nothing to Benjamin Williams. Only freedom mattered to him. Theodore Smith nodded and smiled, innocent and carefree. "Nice." Saying this, he took my hand and slowly walked away, admiring the artwork. He didn't ask me a single thing about Benjamin Williams. I wanted to explain, but he just smiled. "It's not your fault for picking a fool." No need to explain. This reaction was unexpected, but it made me feel somewhat comforted. The next day, I heard that Benjamin Williams' exhibition was abruptly cancelled. No connections could save it. Benjamin Williams called me in a fury. "Your boyfriend is powerful, huh? Have you turned into a gold digger now? I remember you used to be quite the artist." I laughed. "Thanks to you. If you hadn't cheated, I wouldn't have had the chance to become one." After hanging up, I personally cooked a meal to thank Theodore Smith for giving Benjamin Williams a hard time and avenging me. When Theodore Smith came home that night, He saw me in a silk home dress, sitting under the soft light with a table full of hot dishes waiting for him. He paused, his eyes showing a deeper meaning. "Is the food to your taste?" I asked with a smile. He took a bite and while chewing asked calmly, "Can we do it tonight?" I was speechless. Sure, physical comfort often leads to thoughts of intimacy, but isn't it too soon, sir? Seeing my silence, Theodore Smith made the decision. "I'll cancel my video conference tonight. Let's go to bed early." That night, we did not go to bed early. We were busy until 11, and I was exhausted, being carried to the shower by Theodore Smith. Weak and sleepy, I frowned. "We'll have a baby soon at this rate. Have you thought about that?" Theodore Smith paused. "I have. But if you don't want a child, I can take precautions." I was surprised. My words had been offhand, but we both knew that a stable marriage needed a child to solidify it. "Are you joking?" I didn't believe him. Theodore Smith whispered in my ear. "I'm serious. As long as you can be as vibrant and radiant as before, don't keep a sad face." In my tiredness, my mind hazy, I wondered how Theodore Smith knew what I used to be like since we had barely interacted before. We had never crossed paths much. He was always the golden child, and I was a nobody, barely noticeable. Who knew that a disheartened arranged marriage would land me with such a catch as Theodore Smith? This had surely enraged the other high-status girls in our circle. If they knew how tender Theodore Smith was after the fact, they might try to strangle me. I snuggled into Theodore Smith's arms, smiling slightly but not taking his tenderness seriously. We were both products of this privileged circle, familiar with the sight of parents with outside families and illegitimate children suddenly appearing to claim kinship. It's the fate of arranged marriages. Unavoidable. If I fell for him just because of a few sweet words, it wouldn't be my intellect but his charm working. I closed my eyes and drifted into sleep. With such a good physique, being close to him was a bonus, the only perk of this marriage. I slept soundly in Theodore Smith's arms and woke up in the morning to find that I had drooled in my sleep, and it had landed on Theodore Smith's arm. Feeling embarrassed under his amused gaze, I got up to wash and dress properly for breakfast at the Smith residence, officially joining the family as a daughter-in-law. The Smiths were all good-looking and cultured, making the meal a pleasant experience. After breakfast, Theodore Smith and his elder brother went to the study for a discussion, while I stayed in the living room with the others, chatting. The TV was playing a drama, but only Theodore Smith's niece Lily was watching. The rest of us were talking. A few minutes later, Lily suddenly shouted, pointing at the TV screen, "Auntie! It's Auntie!" We all fell silent, turning in unison to stare at the screen. Lily, thrilled, kept pointing at the actress on TV. "Auntie is on TV." I raised an eyebrow. What a coincidence. Theodore Smith's sister-in-law looked panicked, quickly hugging Lily and stuffing a pastry into her mouth. "Eat up, you must be hungry." Lily reluctantly chewed the pastry, still trying to point at the TV, but her hand was also given a pastry. Everyone else was silent, the silence so heavy it felt like a bridge over troubled water. Even the servants looked awkward, moving quietly. Only I watched the TV with interest, commenting on the melodramatic plot and subpar production, then said nonchalantly, "This actress can pull off Barbie Pink, her looks are really something." Lily swallowed her pastry and clapped her hands. "She's Auntie." The sister-in-law, desperate, stuffed another chocolate into Lily's mouth, looking at me with teary eyes. "You know kids can be a bit silly." I laughed, and just as the show ended, I checked the cast list. Lead actress, Maya Rodriguez. I knew Maya Rodriguez. She had great resources, debuting as a lead and never playing a supporting role, with numerous endorsements. If not for her lackluster acting, she might have been the top actress in the industry by now. Rumor had it that she had a powerful backer. Now I know it's true, and I also know who the benefactor is. I'm secretly glad I didn't take last night's tenderness seriously. Otherwise, I'd be a fool. One should never fall into the same trap twice. After a while, Theodore Smith came out of the study and saw the strange scene in the living room. Everyone was watching me cautiously, while I was sitting with my chin in my hand, watching TV with interest. Unaware of what had happened, Theodore Smith patted my head. "Is it good?" I nodded. "Yes, very good." Lily tried to say something but was quickly whisked away by my sister-in-law. Her mouth covered. I squinted at Theodore Smith's handsome face and smiled at him. "Don't you have an engagement tonight?" Theodore Smith nodded, taking me away from the Smith residence, leaving the family relieved and no longer on edge because of me. The evening's engagement was with Theodore Smith's close friends who wanted to meet me. When we entered the private room, the handsome men and beautiful women were lively and noisy. Seeing us, they all stood up and greeted me as sister-in-law. Some whispered among themselves, "She doesn't look as good as Maya Rodriguez, right?" I knew I was more on the plain side, not stunning, but who cares? I smiled and found a corner to sit in, planning to stay low-key until the end. Theodore Smith walked over and sat next to me. With him there, the corner was no longer a corner but the center of attention. Seeing Theodore Smith's actions, everyone immediately stopped whispering and instead enthusiastically offered me drinks. But Theodore Smith didn't let me drink a drop, taking it all for me. He whispered in my ear, the faint scent of whiskey on his breath. "This alcohol is strong. It's bad for your stomach. Next time, we'll drink some wine, and you can have a little." I nodded, noticing several jaws drop. Someone teased, "Brother Smith has never been this gentle with anyone. Even with a beauty like Maya Rodriguez, he's always so aloof. Who'd have thought he'd block drinks for a girl?" That person yelped in pain as if someone pinched him. Theodore Smith glanced at him. "Go sober up and don't come back." The person realized his mistake and quickly ran out. The room fell silent, with everyone cautiously watching me with the same look as Theodore Smith's sister-in-law. I felt second-hand embarrassment for them. I cheerfully tried to ease the tension. "Speaking of Maya Rodriguez, does anyone here know her? Introduce me. I'd love to meet a beauty." This didn't go over well, and everyone fell even quieter, looking at me as if I was the jealous wife ready to cause trouble for a mistress. Theodore Smith patted my hand. "Don't mind the rumors, they're baseless." I nodded, not minding at all. As long as my family and the Smith family cooperated well, the wealth I could inherit would grow, and I'd be happy to let everything else slide. But I admired Theodore Smith's ability to lie with a straight face. Even my father couldn't do that. He would only say he was just having fun, never claiming it was baseless gossip. I looked at Theodore Smith and smiled. "I believe you." With sincerity and trust perfectly portrayed, I left everyone stunned, including the guy who'd been sent out to sober up, staring in awe as he opened the door. Then he turned around and was promptly knocked over by someone standing at the door. The poor guy lay sprawled out on the floor. The person at the door with a roguish smile and charming eyes helped him up. "Hey, kid, haven't seen you in years. Why so clumsy now?" The voice was pleasant and cool, just like his smile. Handsome and rakish, but cold to the core. He was like an upgraded version of Benjamin Williams. Seeing that face, my mind went blank, unable to speak, almost suffocating, watching him walk up to me and extend a hand. "Crazy girl, congratulations on your wedding." Crazy Girl was his special nickname for me. I stared at him, my first love, instinctively reaching out but unsure what to say. Theodore Smith was quicker, shaking his hand. "Lucas Johnson, are you staying this time?" Lucas Johnson looked at me and smiled. "Maybe." I turned away, quickly pouring myself a drink and taking a sip. Under Theodore Smith's gaze, I put the glass down, took a few seconds to compose myself, and then smiled at Lucas Johnson. "Long time no see." Ultimately, I couldn't maintain my composure. Within 3 minutes of Lucas Johnson's arrival, I found an excuse to leave the room, standing by the hallway window, trying to calm down. This man, whom I once loved deeply, had repaid me with utter coldness. When I was most infatuated, he said he didn't want to be tied down by a relationship, that my love suffocated him, and then left the country. It took me years to recover, during which I found a replacement in Benjamin Williams, who looked like him. When Benjamin Williams cheated, it felt like watching Lucas Johnson's resolute departure all over again. That's why I turned to an arranged marriage out of despair. At this moment, I felt the need for a cigarette. I searched my pockets, forgetting that I had quit smoking long ago. Suddenly, I heard the click of a lighter and smelled a faint whiff of menthol cigarette smoke. It was Lucas Johnson's favorite brand, one I hadn't smelled in years. Looking up, I saw Lucas Johnson leaning casually against the wall, smiling ambiguously. "Got married quietly, huh?" I nodded. "What else? Wait for you forever." Lucas Johnson chuckled. "Married someone like Theodore Smith, must be happy." I shrugged. "Quite happy." I looked at his familiar face, couldn't help but ask, "Why did you come back suddenly?" Lucas Johnson stared out the window, taking a deep drag on his cigarette. His smile casual. "Heard you got married and realized I might have lost you for good, so I rushed back." I lowered my gaze. "Whether that's true or not, it doesn't matter. I'm married now." Lucas Johnson laughed as if I had told a joke. "You guys are in an arranged marriage. Who takes those seriously in our circle?" I scoffed. "So you came all the way back to be a third wheel?" Years later, I still wanted to believe him. Lucas Johnson took another drag. "I haven't figured it out yet. I just didn't want to lose you. We'll see about the rest." I shook my head. "Don't say any more. My arranged marriage is different. At least as long as I don't catch Theodore Smith cheating, I won't cross the line. I'll stick to my principles until the end." Leaving Lucas Johnson at the window, I returned to the private room. Lucas Johnson sighed behind me. "You used to never leave me alone." I turned back. "But now I'm married. My husband is Theodore Smith." Back in the room, I instinctively crossed my arms. The room was filled with a heavy atmosphere, centered around Theodore Smith. I sat beside him, observing. He drank quickly and heavily, his eyes bloodshot, the phoenix eyes behind his gold-rimmed glasses no longer gentle but intense. Seeing me watching, he gently held my hand. It's cold outside, isn't it? Your hands are freezing. I nodded, snuggling into his arms. Yes, it's cold. Just then, Lucas Johnson entered. Theodore Smith's arm tightened around me as he beckoned Lucas. Come, have a drink. Lucas Johnson sauntered over. Gladly. He glanced at me. Let go of Olivia first. Your PDA is blinding a single guy like me. Theodore Smith held me tighter. As long as we're married, you'll have to endure it. As long as you're in the country. He smiled warmly, but I felt the tension. In the center of it, I braved the pressure for a few hours until it was late at night. Theodore Smith and Lucas Johnson drank all the liquor in the room, leaving everyone else dumbfounded, wondering why they were so intense about it. In the end, both were staggering out of the room, mutually defeated. Lucas Johnson, still with his cocky grin. I've always had good taste, choosing only the best. He glanced at me while I was focused on buttoning Theodore Smith's coat to keep him warm. Lucas Johnson sighed. Except once, when I let go of a priceless treasure. Theodore Smith, shielding me from the wind, smiled faintly. That's why a good treasure can't be given to you. It'd be wasted. The night wind was cold, and I instinctively curled closer to Theodore Smith. Theodore Smith loved holding me, so I was already used to his embrace, naturally snuggling into him. Lucas Johnson hesitated, then slowly asked, Theodore Smith, about Maya Rodriguez. Did you settle things with her before your sudden marriage? She was aiming to marry you. Maya Rodriguez again. I was getting annoyed. Even knowing how arranged marriages worked, did everyone have to mention her to me? I started to pull away from Theodore Smith, but he held me back, firmly stating, I only have one Olivia. He gently stroked my hair. Always have. I forced a smile. It's cold. Let's go home, honey. Theodore Smith nodded, leading me to the car. At the moment I turned around, I suddenly realized that Lucas Johnson's usually sparkling eyes had lost their shine. They were dim, just like mine were when he left. On the way home, Theodore Smith closed his eyes to sober up, and I didn't feel like talking either. We remained silent. After we got home and washed up, I lay in bed, thinking that some things needed to be clarified. I patted Theodore Smith. We're in an arranged marriage, right? Theodore Smith paused. Yes. I continued, I'm just saying if you want to live separately, I'm not against it, but I have conditions. Theodore Smith didn't even open his eyes. Go on. First, no illegitimate children. Second, no bringing anyone home. Third, no arguments with me. These 3 points are essential for the cooperation between our families. I summarized the failures of arranged marriages in our circle and solemnly presented these 3 conditions. Theodore Smith slowly opened his eyes and began to stare at me. After a while he asked hoarsely, Is this your understanding of marriage? I looked down. No, my understanding of marriage is holding hands and growing old together, being a couple for life. But that's someone else's marriage, not mine. I sighed lightly and met Theodore Smith's eyes. It's my understanding of our arranged marriage. Theodore Smith didn't say anything, just looked at me quietly. I thought since we've reached this point, I might as well lay everything out. Of course, if you do want to go out and have fun, then I also have the right to pursue happiness. But I will ensure all my children are yours. I know the rules. Theodore Smith's expression remained unchanged as he moved closer to me, speaking slowly in my ear. I'll consider everything you said today as nonsense. I frowned. How could he insult me when I was being so sincere? Before I could respond, he turned over, making me angry at night. It looks like you need a lesson. Well, let's just say that lesson made me forget my anger. I have to admit, Theodore Smith is a perfect husband. Sometimes, I even think that if we weren't part of this flashy circle, but just ordinary kids from regular families, meeting, falling in love, and getting married naturally, we would be very happy. As I was thinking this, Theodore Smith handed me a stack of documents. I don't like keeping my wife at home. You can go to work. The stack of documents was for the transfer of ownership of an art gallery. Theodore Smith bought me an art gallery. As I stared at him in shock, he patted my head. This gallery is struggling, but I believe you can turn it around. I stared at him. Wow, I don't even have that much confidence in myself. Where does your confidence in me come from? Theodore Smith was serious. You love art. I nodded. What does that have to do with my management skills? Theodore Smith said slowly, You always throw yourself wholeheartedly into what you love, like a moth to a flame. With such passion and persistence, you can achieve anything. I opened my mouth to speak. Where did he get this idea from? The only person and thing I've ever been passionate about is Lucas Johnson. But Theodore Smith had already buttoned his shirt, gently pinching my cheek. Besides, I'll be here to teach you. He seemed to be in a good mood, humming a tune as he left. I'll find you something to do, better than always dwelling on the past. I blinked. When did I dwell on the past? Just the other day, Lucas Johnson wanted to add me on WeChat, and I hesitated for a moment but didn't add him. I zoned out for a moment, but that's it. I haven't been dwelling on the past. That moment of zoning out somehow angered Theodore Smith. He dragged me to the bedroom and gave me a thorough lesson on how to focus. I thought he was acting crazy, but I didn't dare say anything, holding my sore waist. Now, looking at this struggling gallery Theodore Smith gave me, I felt like crying. Maybe he's under too much work pressure. His behavior is becoming increasingly erratic. But regardless, the gallery is mine now, and I can't let it fail, especially since there are employees depending on it. I started learning how to run the gallery, dealing with various people. Theodore Smith helped me a lot, even taking time each night to give me lessons on business management, investment, and people skills. My abilities improved rapidly. Not because I'm smart, but because I had a master teaching me every night. I suddenly felt grateful to my parents. It was like they didn't find me a husband but sent me to a business school with one-on-one tutoring. Life, which had seemed dull, suddenly became bright again. I looked forward to Theodore Smith coming home every night. I even thought that an arranged marriage might not prevent us from growing old lovingly together. But I hadn't thought this for long before life taught me a lesson, reminding me not to fantasize. It started on a calm afternoon when I received a frantic call from my mom. Your father has an illegitimate child causing trouble at the company. I was stunned for a moment. My first reaction was, it's finally our turn. The sword of Damocles has finally fallen. My second reaction was, is he here to take the inheritance I'll get in the future? My third reaction was, he wouldn't dare cause trouble at the company without my dad's consent. In our circle, any big scandals involving illegitimate children are always instigated by the father. Otherwise, if the father turns his back on them, causing a scene is useless. They won't get a penny. I paused and asked my mom, didn't you know Dad had another son? My mom angrily replied, he said he had a vasectomy. I pursed my lips, feeling both like crying and laughing. Growing up watching others fight over inheritance, I always feared when it would happen to me. That's why I never believed an arranged marriage could bring happiness. After 20-some years of fear, now that it's happening, I'm not scared, just annoyed. No matter how graceful someone is, fighting over inheritance is always ugly. Now it's my turn to be the center of attention. Thanks to my dear dad for this wonderful experience. This illegitimate son was aggressive, adept at playing the victim and making threats, driving my mom to her wits' end. I called my dad to negotiate. My dad, who had been domineering all his life, suddenly sounded weak. Olivia, men make mistakes. I admit I was wrong, but I can't control your brother. He's making a huge scene. I sneered. So how can you control it? Give him half of the inheritance. My dad was silent. I hung up, my chest tight with frustration. I could live without the money, but I couldn't accept my dad's silence. I thought my dad was just playing around but still loved me. After all, I was his only child. Now, it seems I was deluding myself. The situation escalated, even reaching Lucas Johnson. Lucas Johnson called, need my help. I laughed bitterly. I can't do anything. What can you do? 2 days later, I found out what he could do. My dad called, furious. How could you have someone beat up my son? That's your brother. Do you think I won't send you to jail? I was bewildered. What are you talking about? My dad, panting with anger. Your brother was beaten up badly, with 2 broken ribs, now in the hospital. The attackers threatened to make him disappear unless he stopped causing trouble. If it wasn't you, who else could it be? He threatened. I've hired bodyguards for him. I'm telling you, he gets half of the inheritance, and no one can change that. Actually, now he gets most of it. If you have the guts, keep having people beat him. Let's see if I don't send you to jail. In that moment, I felt my heart turn cold. I didn't explain a word and hung up. Lucas Johnson called again. As long as he causes trouble, I'll make sure he's in the hospital. I have plenty of money. I can keep this up. Exhausted and filled with grievance, I hung up again. With nowhere to vent my frustration, I thought of Theodore Smith, who was on a business trip. I called him, wanting to complain about why he wasn't helping me, but then remembered he was busy with an important deal and didn't know anything about this, having no energy to care about such matters. So I sniffled, and when he answered, I simply asked, when are you coming back? I kind of miss you. I missed his embrace. Theodore Smith paused. What's wrong? I smiled. Nothing, just miss you. My dad's call had taught me a lot. I have my dignity. I won't take a cent of his money or acknowledge him anymore. But if my dad gives the inheritance to the illegitimate child, and I'm no longer the heiress, Can my marriage with Theodore Smith continue? I couldn't help but ask, if I have no money one day, will we still be together? Theodore Smith laughed. You're already less wealthy than I am. I laughed too, ending the call, feeling exhausted and ignoring everyone's calls. That night, my dad called me over 10 times, and I blocked him. He drove over to find me, but for some reason, several of Theodore Smith's bodyguards were standing outside the villa, preventing him from entering. Feeling humiliated, my dad shouted, Olivia, my precious daughter, that bastard is being sent back home. You're the sole heir to the Lowe family. I was out of my mind. The more I listened, the more something felt off. Watching him from the window, I saw him scratching his head in frustration. Make sure you tell Theodore Smith that the bastard is gone. Then he left in disgrace. I watched his retreating figure, feeling a strange sense of unfamiliarity. I picked up the phone and called my mom. Why did Dad change his mind? My mom sneered. Theodore Smith called me asking what was wrong with you. Then told your dad that if the illegitimate son so much as harmed a hair on your head or took a single penny from you, the Smith family would become mortal enemies with the Lowe family. I could hear a hint of envy in her voice. Your dad is no match for the Smiths. He was scared out of his wits. Olivia, Theodore Smith is a good man. You made the right choice marrying him. I was stunned. I never expected Theodore Smith to go this far for me. I was deeply moved. So when Theodore Smith returned from his business trip that night, I cooked a big meal for him, piling a plate high with oysters. Theodore Smith saw the oysters and laughed, pulling me into the bedroom. No need to eat. I'm still young. 2 hours later, I was sore all over and admitted he really didn't need to eat oysters, hurriedly removing them from the table. If he's like this without eating them, I couldn't imagine what he'd be like if he did. But one thing I was sure of, I had truly found happiness. My gallery was thriving, and my husband adored me. Although I had seen my father's true colors and my mom, heartbroken, had moved to Europe with a young lover, leaving me alone, it didn't matter. I had Theodore Smith. The night my mom moved to Europe, I felt unprecedented loneliness, thinking no one loved me. I lay in bed, holding back tears until the lights went out, then secretly cried. Theodore Smith hugged me from behind, gently patting my back like soothing a child, his calm voice full of determination. I'm here, don't cry. I couldn't help it. I turned around and hugged him, crying and asking, will you be devoted to me? Will you stay with me until we grow old? I asked desperately. Because I had nothing left in terms of love, the only person I could hold on to now was Theodore Smith. He held me close against his chest, and I could hear his steady heartbeat and deep voice. I will. He said it with sincerity and solemnity. And I believed him. The moonlight outside was beautiful, and at that moment, I felt my heart flutter. Theodore Smith quickly resolved the family disputes, allowing me to focus on my work at the gallery. I fell into a state of peaceful happiness, smiling even as I walked. But my annoying ex, Benjamin Williams, couldn't stand to see me happy and came over, wanting to discuss a collaboration. I wished I could shut the door in his face, but as the host, I had to smile and tell him, I can't collaborate with you. Go cool off somewhere else. Benjamin Williams smirked arrogantly. You still can't forget me, can you? I was momentarily speechless. Fortunately, someone else came in at that moment, breaking the silence. Unfortunately, it was Lucas Johnson. He stood behind me, looking Benjamin Williams up and down and frowned. Who is he? My ex, Benjamin Williams answered for me, then looked puzzled at the man who resembled him but was much more handsome, asking me, and who is he? Lucas Johnson glanced at Benjamin Williams, then at his own reflection in the window, and suddenly laughed, confidently and roguishly. Her first love. Then he added, before you. Benjamin Williams was stunned. He looked at Lucas Johnson, then back at himself, and suddenly seemed to understand something, pointing at me incredulously. You used me as a stand-in? My secret was exposed, and my cheeks burned with embarrassment. I remained silent. Benjamin Williams glanced at me a few times, then at the higher quality version of Lucas Johnson, and finally couldn't accept it. He turned and left. Lucas Johnson sneered. He's not even worthy of being my stand-in. He looked down at me. Crazy girl, your taste is questionable. I hated that nickname and frowned. If you have something to say, say it. And don't call me Crazy Girl. The nickname, Crazy Girl, came from when I loved Lucas Johnson with a crazed passion. He had jokingly given me that name. I was a foolishly love-struck girl back then, willing to do anything for him. I even remember on the day he left, July 2nd, I posted on social media that my life was meaningless and that I was going to end it at Launching Lake. Looking back now, I feel ashamed and pathetic. But at the time, I really would have done it for Lucas Johnson. The only reason I didn't was that when I got to Launching Lake, someone was drowning and being rescued, and there were so many people around that I couldn't even get close to the water. After trying to push through the crowd for a while, I lost the urge to jump and ended up walking away like a zombie. The nickname, Crazy Girl, captured all my past foolish bravery and madness, which I didn't want to remember. Lucas Johnson's smile faded. That question you asked me that day, I've thought about it a lot and now I have an answer. I was confused for a moment. What had I asked him? I couldn't remember. Lucas Johnson continued, I don't want to see you and Theodore Smith pretending to be in love, even if it's fake. I don't want to be a third wheel. He grabbed my hand. Olivia, no one in this world has ever loved me as recklessly as you did. I've never felt that kind of love again. Can you give me another chance? I was stunned and pulled my hand away, showing him my wedding ring, repeating, I'm married. Lucas Johnson didn't care. The same place you get married, you can get divorced. He said, I used to be against marriage, but I can marry you if you get divorced. I lowered my eyes, feeling a tinge of irony. Back then, I desperately wanted to be with Lucas Johnson forever, but he ran away faster than anyone. Now that I'm married, he comes back saying he wants to be with me forever. I shook my head, pointing to my wedding ring again. Theodore Smith put this on me. I won't accept anyone else. Lucas Johnson hesitated. We were in love before. Does that mean nothing compared to an arranged marriage? You said it yourself, it was in the past. I opened the gallery door. The past is the past, the present is the present. Lucas Johnson fell silent, then bent down, grinning roguishly at me. Crazy girl, I've never wanted something and not gotten it. Okay, I said calmly, already thinking about having steak with Theodore Smith after work. He patted my head. Just wait. I watched him leave with his carefree steps, not thinking much of it, seeing it as just a minor disturbance in my peaceful life. But that night, just as Theodore Smith and I were about to sleep, a piercing ringtone woke us up. Theodore Smith answered the phone, his expression changing, and hurriedly got dressed, telling me, I have to go out, before leaving the house. I thought it was something urgent at the Smith Company, given that Theodore Smith had been busy with an important deal recently. But I never expected that a few hours later, I would see a video from the paparazzi showing Theodore Smith rushing Maya Rodriguez, a popular actress, to the hospital after a suicide attempt. He looked frantic, with his usually meticulously buttoned shirt done up wrong. He didn't even bother to fix it as he got out of the ambulance, running into the hospital alongside the stretcher. I stared at my phone, feeling a chill spread through my body. My dad had a son, my mom had a young lover, and all I had was Theodore Smith. But Theodore Smith had more than just me. Oh, and Lucas Johnson, who called me, Crazy girl, come out for a drink. I watched the video of Theodore Smith, feeling heartbroken, and after a few seconds of hesitation, I agreed. I don't know what came over me, but I got up, showered, put on makeup, and wore a short skirt. I got into Lucas Johnson's car and went to a bar, drinking myself into oblivion. Lucas Johnson leaned close to me amid the loud music. See, Theodore Smith doesn't love you that much either. Get back together with me, okay? I didn't respond. Lucas Johnson smiled and didn't push it, drinking with me until we were both drunk. I vaguely remember him saying something about how easily Maya Rodriguez fell for his tricks. But I was too dizzy to make sense of it. I just kept drinking, tears mixing with the alcohol dripping from my chin. From tonight, I had no one. When we left the bar, Lucas Johnson helped me fix my messy hair and asked, Come with me. I won't leave you again. I looked at him, took a deep breath, and finally shook my head with what little sense I had left. Instinctively, I knew I had a husband and couldn't go with someone else. Lucas Johnson seemed a bit down. But he quickly smiled again. It's okay. One day you'll come back. He called a driver to take me home, watching me get into the car with his hands in his pockets, smiling confidently. I stumbled home, not bothering to wash up or change, and collapsed on the bed. In a haze, around dawn, with sunlight streaming through the window, someone with a cold aura sat beside me, silently changing my clothes and wiping my face with a towel. Then they hugged me from behind and fell asleep. Instinctively, I turned and murmured, Husband. He responded with a hum, patting my back to soothe me to sleep. The next day, I woke up with a hangover and found myself in Theodore Smith's arms. He still had a faint scent of irises, which was from Maya Rodriguez's endorsed brand. When we first got married, I didn't mind Maya Rodriguez's presence. But things were different now, and the thought of her pained me deeply. I quickly pulled away, pushing him off and heading to the guest room. Theodore Smith, bloodshot eyes and exhausted, asked hoarsely, Where are you going? I paused but didn't answer. We were in an arranged marriage. Technically, I didn't have the right to question him since I hadn't caught him cheating. That marriage certificate meant nothing in our twisted world. But I couldn't stand it. I turned back and gave him a bright, polite smile, just like before I had fallen for him. I don't want to disturb your life-saving efforts. Theodore Smith reached out to pull me back, but I stepped away, disgusted. These were the hands that had rushed Maya Rodriguez to the hospital. He could save anyone in the world, but not Maya Rodriguez. I couldn't tolerate that. I was selfish. Don't touch me. I just showered, I said, making up an excuse, forgetting that Theodore Smith had changed my clothes. Something in my disdainful look and guarded attitude seemed to hurt Theodore Smith. He silently withdrew his hand, watching me walk into the guest room. As I closed the door, I heard him say softly, "I told you I have nothing to do with her." "Right, you're a saint, a compassionate savior. That's why she called you when she tried to kill herself," I replied sarcastically and shut the door hard, wiping away my tears. I thought I could manage without anyone, even my unreliable parents, as long as I had Theodore Smith. We could have a new family, one that could weather any storm. But reality slapped me hard. In the end, I slept alone in the guest room. After a while, Theodore Smith knocked on the door. "Olivia, open up. Just say what you need to. I'm lying down and don't want to get up." Theodore Smith paused before speaking. "Give me a week. After that, Maya Rodriguez won't bother me anymore." He added emphatically, "I promise you with everything I have." But I didn't believe him. Still, I checked my phone. A week from now was July 2nd. What a coincidence. July 2nd must be cursed for me. 5 years ago, on July 2nd, Lucas Johnson left me, and I decided to jump into the lake. 5 years later, on July 2nd, Theodore Smith promised to cut ties with his ex. I buried my head under the covers, ignoring Theodore Smith. I didn't even know when he left. All I knew was that from that day on, I started a cold war with Theodore Smith. The issue with Maya Rodriguez spread so widely that even my mom in Europe heard about it. She called and said, "You need to have a child quickly. Children are the key to a successful arranged marriage. Look at your dad's situation. It was only resolved because you married Theodore Smith." I sighed, sincerely hoping my mom was enjoying her life in Europe and would stay there longer. But a few days later, rumors about Lucas Johnson and me started spreading in our circle. From being my first love to the recent outing where we went to a bar in short skirts. The rumors spread like wildfire. Paparazzi even took photos and posted them online, sparking ridicule. Both spouses are cheating. No one is losing out. The rumors intensified, and the Smith family elders caught wind of them, calling Theodore Smith home for a talk, even suspecting the paternity of any potential child. Theodore Smith's sister-in-law secretly called me, saying that the elders were so angry they were considering cutting off cooperation with my family. This was a signal that the next step would be replacing me as their daughter-in-law. But Theodore Smith refused, stubbornly insisting on maintaining the cooperation, infuriating the elders. His sister-in-law sighed. "If this were me, my husband would have thrown me out without hesitation." Defying the elders might cost Theodore the chance to lead the Smith family in the future. She sounded envious. "So you see, you should be content. He might have made a small mistake with Maya Rodriguez, but overall, he's always on your side, even daring to argue with the elders for you." I didn't respond. I knew that no other man would risk his future to keep me. But I also knew that the more Theodore did for me, the harder it was to get past Maya Rodriguez. He once said, "When I fall in love, I do so recklessly, with passion and persistence." Desperately, I thought, what can I do? From the moment I fell in love, I developed a sort of purity. I couldn't bear him touching another woman. That evening, Theodore Smith came home exhausted, clearly drained from his argument with the elders. While changing, he warned me, "Lucas Johnson has always been ruthless. To get what he wants, he won't hesitate to destroy it first." He looked at me with a blank expression. "Olivia, stay away from him. He won't make you happy." I pursed my lips. "But will you?" Theodore Smith looked at me. "I will. I promised." I felt like I heard a joke and laughed exaggeratedly. "Go save some lives. Someone needs you more than I do." Theodore Smith frowned. "I told you, I'll deal with everything by July 2nd. I shrugged, letting him say whatever he wanted. I wouldn't believe him. I'd rather be alone forever than be blind to everything just to have a home. I thought it was time to consider divorce. I'm not cut out for arranged marriages. Sorry, Mom and Dad. The only consolation was that my gallery was doing well and gaining recognition in the city. That night, I was invited to an art exhibition. To my surprise, I saw Theodore Smith there. I checked the invitation again, realizing belatedly that the event was hosted by an art organization Theodore had been funding. I pretended not to see him and walked to the other side, but unexpectedly ran into my ex, Benjamin Williams. He had drunk too much and upon seeing me, tried to grab my hand but was quickly slapped away by Theodore Smith. Benjamin Williams, undeterred, clung to Theodore, complaining, "I, Benjamin Williams, have been a genius since childhood. What woman wouldn't love me?" He pointed at me, accusing, "But this woman, she used me as a stand-in." He pointed to his face, telling the surrounding onlookers, "Her first love looks exactly like me. She dated me as a stand-in. Does she have any morals?" I didn't care about Benjamin Williams' outburst. He was the one who cheated first. But I couldn't help glancing at Theodore Smith, expecting him to be upset. Instead, he looked completely unbothered. I lowered my head and laughed bitterly. Because he didn't care, he remained indifferent. I cleared my throat and interrupted Benjamin Williams, deliberately saying, "Nonsense, my first love was way more handsome than you. You're just a low-grade version." Ugh. The ugh wasn't an exaggeration of my disgust but a real feeling. My stomach churned, and I almost threw up, quickly covering my mouth and running to the bathroom. My high heels wobbled, and I stumbled. Someone caught me, helping me steady myself. I turned to see Theodore Smith, his face expressionless, guiding me to the bathroom while asking, "Your first love was way more handsome than him?" I couldn't speak, fearing I would vomit if I opened my mouth. In the bathroom, I retched until my stomach was empty. Theodore Smith stayed by my side, patting my back and giving me water to rinse my mouth, his frown deepening. Afterward, he took my wine glass, shadowing me for the rest of the night, blocking others from approaching and forbidding me from drinking. Everyone praised, "Mr. Smith treats his wife so well." But I felt sick, both physically and mentally. I wondered if he had been this considerate when he took Maya Rodriguez to the hospital. Benjamin Williams was dragged out by Theodore's bodyguards, finally giving my ears some peace. But my stomach still felt awful. I barely managed to endure until the end of the exhibition, too exhausted to drive, so Theodore Smith had to help me into his car. In fact, I had no choice. Theodore Smith's stern expression left no room for refusal. At home, I struggled to remove my makeup and change clothes. Theodore Smith went out briefly, returning with a small box. I looked down to see a pregnancy test. "What?" I asked, bewildered. He remained serious. "Take the test." I didn't want to take the test. I just wanted to sleep. I was exhausted from all the vomiting. I couldn't help but think, was he so familiar with this routine because he practiced it on Maya Rodriguez? A surge of uncontrollable anger rose up within me, as if my hormones were being manipulated, and I blurted out, "I'm planning to divorce anyway. In the future, you can find another woman to take tests with." Theodore Smith's face darkened. "Why?" I was extremely irritable tonight, almost losing control of my emotions. "I don't even know why." I pushed his hand away. "Because our marriage is just an arrangement. I can't sleep with a man I have no feelings for, okay?" Theodore Smith took off his glasses, squinting slightly as he stared at me. After a moment, he put them back on and pointed to the bathroom. "Are you going to take the test yourself, or should I help you?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Help me take a test that can only be done in the bathroom? Did he have some strange fetish? I was about to make a sarcastic comment, but seeing him head toward the bathroom as if he were serious, I promptly shut my mouth and went to take the test myself. I left the pregnancy test on the sink and exhaustedly went to sleep. I slept through the night. I didn't even realize I had fallen asleep in our original bedroom instead of the guest room where I had been staying. In the morning, Theodore Smith was already awake. He said flatly, "Your pregnancy test shows 2 lines." I hadn't yet processed this when he added, "Assuming the child is mine, I plan to stay with the Smith family. Once you have the baby, you'll have fulfilled your part of the marriage arrangement. You can choose to leave or live your own life." His face was expressionless, as if he didn't care at all. "I won't force you to stay." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I see. Get rid of the mother and keep the child, right? Is that what he meant by leave the mother and keep the child, as soon as I got pregnant? Was he planning to leave the child in the position to Maya Rodriguez or some other woman? My hormones, which had been out of control since last night, flared up again. I coldly laughed as I sat up in bed. "I'll take care of the child. I can leave today." I threw in an extra remark. "I must have been blind to fall for a jerk like you." Theodore Smith was stunned. He stepped forward and grabbed my arm. "What did you just say?" "I didn't hear you." I shook him off. "I said you're a jerk." He grabbed me again. "The previous sentence." I shook him off once more. "I said I was blind." I stormed back to the guest room, too angry to sleep. But Theodore Smith, for some reason, seemed to be in a good mood. He even whistled as he left for work, which only made me angrier. Not long after Theodore Smith left for work, the butler from the Smith family's old house suddenly showed up. Because we were newlyweds, we had only hired a part-time worker and hadn't employed any live-in help. But now the butler arrived with 2 people, repeatedly instructing, "This is Mrs. Smith, carrying Mr. Smith's child. Please take good care of her. Mr. Smith values this very much." I was completely confused, listening to the butler's chatter. When he finally paused to catch his breath, I seized the opportunity to ask, "What's going on?" The butler smiled. Mr. Smith hired them to take care of you. Behind him was a driver holding a pile of shopping bags. These are skincare products, makeup, and clothes specifically for pregnant women, all purchased on Mr. Smith's orders. Mrs. Smith, you're very fortunate. Mr. Smith has thought of everything for you. Hearing Theodore Smith's name made me angry, and my face darkened. But since this was the Smith family's house, it was up to Theodore Smith to arrange things. I turned and went back to my room, taking a phone call as I went. The call was from Lucas Johnson, sounding very agitated. Are you pregnant? I asked. How do you know? Lucas Johnson seemed to light a cigarette, taking a heavy drag. Theodore Smith called to tell me, saying he wanted to invite me to dinner to celebrate. Damn it! I was speechless. Theodore Smith was spreading the news far and wide before anything was even certain. I still didn't know what to do about this baby. Lucas Johnson asked, How can you leave with me like this? I replied, When did I say I was going to leave with you? Lucas Johnson's voice grew more intense. Don't you know why I came back? You have to come with me. Lucas Johnson had been spoiled since childhood, always having his way. Back then, I used to fall for his act, but now I didn't want to give in to anyone. I hung up the phone immediately. Lucas Johnson called back, but I didn't answer. He persistently added me on WeChat, but I didn't accept. A while later he sent me a text, I want you to see if this child is worth keeping. I didn't pay much attention. I wasn't going out. What could he do to show me? But 2 hours later, I realized how wrong I was. Even if I didn't go out, Lucas Johnson could still send someone to my door. Maya Rodriguez showed up with bandages wrapped around her arm. I didn't let her in. She cried at the door, If you really are pregnant, I'll leave forever and never hope for Theodore Smith again. I sneered. Theodore Smith and I are married. Whether I'm pregnant or not, you shouldn't be hoping for someone else's husband. Maya Rodriguez was stunned, then cried again, But I can't let go. 5 years ago, he risked his life for me, jumping in to save me when I was drowning even though he couldn't swim. He risked his life for me. How can I let go? I was taken aback. Maya Rodriguez took out her phone and showed me a news article from 5 years ago, clearly stating that Theodore Smith had saved her. He had even received an award for bravery. I felt a chill and a hint of irony. How could Theodore Smith abandon a woman he risked his life to save just because of an arranged marriage? Why did he agree to the marriage in the first place? I even heard from Theodore Smith's sister-in-law that the arranged marriage was his choice among several families. He picked me, not the other way around. Did he choose me to break up with his beloved? Maya Rodriguez continued to cry. Has Theodore Smith ever risked his life for you? I shook my head. No. See, that's why you don't understand. When a man risks his life for you, it's hard to let go. If one day Theodore Smith does the same for you, you'll understand how I feel. I was silent for a moment, then said through gritted teeth, I don't need that. Please leave. Maya Rodriguez refused to go, continuing to linger at the door. I was forced to call Theodore Smith. Maya Rodriguez is at the door. Come and save her. Within half an hour, I heard the roar of an engine as Theodore Smith drove back quickly. I laughed bitterly to myself. When it comes to Maya Rodriguez, he rushes back. Theodore Smith walked up the steps, his face as cold as ice. Maya Rodriguez rushed to grab his sleeve, but he pulled her aside to the car, saying something I couldn't hear. After a while, Maya Rodriguez stopped crying and obediently got into the car. Theodore Smith turned to me. I'll take her home. Wait for me. Then he drove off. I watched the taillights, then looked down and laughed. What was I expecting? For his true love to be me? I went back to the bedroom, started packing my clothes, and soon left the house with my suitcase. I couldn't stay there anymore. When Theodore Smith realized I had left and called me, I was already at a scenic spot in the mountains. The green hills and clear waters, the red brick ghost houses, were perfect for clearing my mind. He said something over the phone, probably about July 2nd in 5 years, but the signal in the mountains was poor, so I hung up. From now on, Theodore Smith's affairs had nothing to do with me. When I finished clearing my mind, I would deal with the baby and the marriage. I really wasn't cut out for arranged marriages. I strolled through the mountains, picking fruits and listening to the babbling streams. After 2 days, I felt much calmer and finally checked my phone to see if anyone had been trying to reach me. The signal in the mountains was terrible. I had to move around a lot to get the app to open. When it did, I regretted it immediately. News about Theodore Smith and Maya Rodriguez was everywhere. I wanted to close the page, but with the poor signal, even that was delayed, forcing me to read the headlines and dates. Smith Jr. denies relationship with Maya Rodriguez, claiming he was just helping a friend. Date: July 2nd. I wanted to open the article to read more, but it started raining. I reluctantly stood up and headed back to the guest house. But within 10 minutes, the rain turned into a downpour, drenching me completely, with no place to take cover. I looked around, feeling a growing sense of unease. The area I was in was surrounded by mountains, forming a basin. I quickened my pace, running back to the guest house. By the time I got there, the water was already up to my calves. The wooden benches in the yard were floating. I stood on the stone table in the yard, trying to call for help. But there was no signal at all. I felt a chill in my heart. The water quickly rose to the level of the table, still relentlessly surging. I held my stomach, my mind blank with fear. Even though I had planned to deal with the baby, standing on the edge of life and death, I couldn't help but think, this baby hasn't been born yet. It hasn't seen its mom and dad. Thinking of this, I suddenly wanted to call Theodore Smith. But this damn phone, which finally got a signal, cut out as soon as I dialed. I took a deep breath, looking at the ground. Running uphill was no longer an option. I never imagined that someone like me, unloved by my dad and not particularly cherished by my mom, tormented by my ex and cheated on by my new love, couldn't even hope for a decent end. What a wretched fate. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I jumped down and began to wade through the water, hoping to find something to float on. But as the water reached my waist, all I found was a broken basin, and I didn't know if it would be of any use. I was numb from the cold, the fear, and the anger, with my phone waterlogged and useless. As night fell, I climbed back onto the table, the water now up to my chest, almost submerging me. I despairingly realized that I was done for. I started thinking about how to maintain some dignity, not wanting to be found bloated and floating, and ended up crying, "What the hell did I do wrong? Why are you doing this to me, God?" Maybe I was crying too loudly, or maybe I was hallucinating, but I heard a response from God. It was hoarse but still pleasant. "Olivia, don't be afraid. It's okay." I was even more frightened. Was this the voice of death coming for me? Rubbing my eyes in the heavy rain, I saw Theodore Smith swimming toward me. I thought I was seeing things. But 10 minutes later he reached me, climbed onto the table, and tucked me under his arm, swimming toward the roof. I bit my lip hard, the pain making me hiss, confirming I wasn't dreaming. Theodore Smith had actually come. He hoisted me onto the roof and climbed up after me, looking at the rising water below. "Rescue will be here soon. Don't be afraid." I was still in shock, staring blankly at him. "How did you know I was here?" Theodore Smith wiped away some rain, holding me tightly as if grateful I was still alive. After a moment, his voice trembling, he said, "I checked the browsing history on your iPad and saw this guest house. You called me, so I had someone locate you." His whole body was shaking, so much so that I suspected he was scared. "No matter if you want a divorce or want to go with Lucas Johnson, I'll let you go. But promise me, don't run away again." I was shivering from the cold but still couldn't help retorting, "When did I say I was going with Lucas Johnson?" Theodore Smith paused. "But you want a divorce. That's because of your improper relationship with Maya Rodriguez." I shouted, swallowing a mouthful of rain. Theodore Smith frowned, shielding me from the rain with his hand. "I told you we have no relationship. You saw my statement, didn't you?" I curled up in his arms, the curiosity about his July 2nd promise still gnawing at me. "But why did you wait until July 2nd to admit it?" Theodore Smith fell silent. He looked uncomfortable, glancing at me before finally muttering something in the pouring rain. I didn't catch it. I wanted to ask again, but the rescue team arrived, saving both of us from the flood. As we were being rescued, Theodore Smith's driver was waiting at the foot of the mountain. Seeing us, he was overjoyed. "Mrs. Smith, you have no idea how afraid of water Mr. Smith is." He just rushed in without hesitation. No one could stop him. I looked at Theodore Smith in shock, recalling the events. I didn't remember him showing any signs of fear, just shivering from the cold. After leaving the mountains, it felt like a veil between us had been lifted. No matter what, he had saved me, so I couldn't keep giving him the cold shoulder. Besides, I was still curious about what he had said in the mountains. My body wasn't as strong as Theodore Smith's. After getting out, I developed a high fever, but thankfully, the baby was okay. Theodore Smith stayed by my side, not leaving for a moment. Even as I drifted in and out of feverish sleep, I kept asking, "What did you say in the mountains?" "I can't sleep until you tell me." Seeing my feverish face and my stubbornness, Theodore Smith sighed. "I said I promised Maya Rodriguez's brother I would be her boyfriend for 5 years. July 2nd was the end date. If you don't believe me, I can take you to see her brother." This revelation made me sit up. "You dated Maya Rodriguez for her brother? That's too confusing." Theodore Smith helped me drink some water and laid me back down. Back then I was drowning, and her brother saved me. When he found out who I was, he asked me to protect Maya Rodriguez for 5 years in the entertainment industry, keeping her away from shady deals. After 5 years, when he returned from studying abroad, I could leave. I was even more puzzled, feeling like he was lying. But you swam so well just now. How did you almost drown? I remembered Maya Rodriguez saying Theodore Smith had risked his life for her, feeling a pang of jealousy. Didn't you risk your life to save Maya Rodriguez? What was that about? Theodore Smith looked visibly uncomfortable, stammering without answering. I got angry and sat up again. Theodore Smith pressed me back down, exasperated. I saw a post from a girl on my social media saying she was going to commit suicide at the lake. I rushed there to save her, but Maya Rodriguez happened to be jumping into the lake too. I wasn't wearing my glasses and got confused, jumping in after her. I almost drowned because I can't swim well. Luckily, her brother arrived and saved us both. He sighed. I received an award for bravery, and her brother, knowing my identity, asked me to protect her in the industry. But how could you mistake the person jumping into the lake? I asked, still half believing him. Something flickered in my mind, but I couldn't grasp it with my feverish brain. I clutched my head, thinking hard, then suddenly remembered, July 2nd, 5 years ago, I posted about jumping into the lake on social media. I sat up again, staring at Theodore Smith in disbelief. You couldn't mean me, could you? For the first time, I saw Theodore Smith looking so uncomfortable. He quickly nodded and then stared out the window. I was really confused, so I took out my new phone and checked my WeChat contacts. I remembered that I had added Theodore Smith after we got married. I scrolled through my contacts, recognizing most of them, except for one person I wasn't very familiar with. It was a girl who had once added me, saying she wanted to discuss art with me. After adding me, she never contacted me again. I looked at Theodore Smith, then at the girl's profile, and back at Theodore Smith. It seemed like there was a resemblance between the girl and Theodore Smith. My staring must have made Theodore Smith feel pressured. He grabbed my phone. Stop looking. It was me. I pretended to be a girl to follow you. That picture is of my cousin. I fell silent. Silence filled the room. Besides being silent, I didn't know what to do. After a long time, I finally managed to say, So, we've actually known each other for quite a while, huh? Theodore Smith blushed and nodded. Longer than you think. Why were you spying on me? I hugged myself. Can you give me a valid reason? Theodore Smith's face turned red again. He blushed more in these few moments than in all the time I'd known him. Swallowing hard, he explained. Back then, Lucas Johnson said there was a girl who was particularly passionate and persistent, making him a bit scared, afraid he'd actually fall for her and be trapped. Out of curiosity, I checked you out. He touched my face. And then I saw you so devoted, so selfless in your love for Lucas Johnson. You only had eyes for him, but I was deeply moved by the way you loved someone so intensely. I couldn't forget it. So you pretended to be a girl to spy on me? I still couldn't let it go. Theodore Smith rubbed his nose. I couldn't add you with my own WeChat. You were in love with Lucas Johnson. Doing that would have been like stealing you away. Why didn't you confess to me after Lucas Johnson left? I was amused by Theodore Smith's awkwardness and felt less scared. Theodore Smith rubbed his nose again. How could I confess while using a girl's profile picture? That would make me a creep. Seeing him so flustered, so different from the usual Theodore Smith, I couldn't help but smile. So, is everything settled with Maya Rodriguez now? Yes. Her brother is back. I've handed Maya Rodriguez over to him. My promise is fulfilled. I nodded. And what about me? Theodore Smith looked up. What about you? I raised an eyebrow. You spied on me, upset me, and almost got me drowned in the mountains. How are you going to make it up to me? Theodore Smith grew more nervous, making me feel a bit sorry for teasing him. Slowly, I pinned his girl profile to the top of my contacts and smiled with narrowed eyes. Your punishment is to talk to me using this WeChat account from now on. Keep this profile picture. From now on, I won't call you Theodore Smith. I'll call you Miss Smith, and you can't change the name. Theodore Smith's face turned redder, and after a moment of hesitation, he nodded, as long as it makes you happy. I looked at the WeChat account with the sunny girl drinking milk tea and couldn't stop laughing. Theodore Smith couldn't sit still with me laughing so hard and got up to find a doctor to check on my condition. Watching his tall figure, I thought of that petite profile picture and started laughing again, rolling around in bed until a phone call interrupted me. Still giggling, I answered. Hello? Lucas Johnson's voice came through, anxious and restless. What are you doing? Where are you? I've been looking for you for 2 or 3 days. Where have you been? My good mood was completely ruined. Why are you yelling at me? Do you need something? Lucas Johnson hesitated, then said, I heard you disappeared for a couple of days. I've been looking for you everywhere. Crazy girl, I've figured it out. I don't care if you're pregnant. Just come with me. I'll never find someone like you again. I lowered my eyes. A few years ago, those were the words I most longed to hear. But now, I touched my belly and looked at Theodore Smith standing by the door. Finally, I smiled and said, "What's lost is lost. Lucas Johnson, not everyone will wait for you. Now I'm Theodore Smith's wife, carrying his child. Wherever he is, that's my home." There was silence on the other end, and I grew impatient, hanging up the phone first. Some people are destined to be lost, and some people are destined to be together. I waved at Theodore Smith. "Honey, let's go home when I get better." Theodore Smith smiled brightly. "Okay, let's go home." The end.